All right. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, or maybe evening, or maybe some other time, depending on what time zone you are located in. There are so many of you in the waiting room who are joining right now, so we'll give it a minute or two just for everybody to join the call and get settled in. We'll get started in just a moment. So while we're getting ourselves situated, hi, everyone. My name is Yenny. I'm the founder and CEO here at Kari Prehab. And these Meet the Expert sessions are actually like a really lovely, interactive, fun thing that we really enjoy doing because it gives us an opportunity to connect with our community. That's all of you, and to answer questions, hear what your concerns are about your bone health. And everybody here on the panel is total research nerds. So this is actually the thing that they enjoy doing the most as well, is just hearing the questions and being able to answer them and provide research-based, evidence-backed, tangible, actionable guidance for how to safely and effectively exercise for bone health. So these sessions are really intended to just be a very informal, kind of friendly environment in which we can learn from each other and answer questions. I'm going to go ahead and mute a couple of folks here in the session just to keep things tidy. And as we get started, we can basically, you're welcome to unmute yourself at any time to ask a question. You can also put questions into the chat and we'll basically address those as they come in. Often there are questions that are really interesting for everybody to hear the answers to, so we sometimes kind of lump those together into one bigger topic to discuss. And I also think it's fantastic that we have so many members of our coaching team here, including many of our senior coaches who are all highly experienced in this field, and they all bring slightly different perspectives based on their professional training and their experience working in the field as well. So feel free to drop your questions into the chat at any time that you'd like. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get started with some introductions. Michaela, maybe you would like to go first.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Michaela. I'm the co-creator and the program director of our strength training and yoga for osteoporosis program. So what that means is that I'm kind of in the weeds with the coaches and the clients and making sure that everything is going really smoothly as you move throughout your program. My background started with yoga. I'm a yoga medicine certified, not certified personal trainer, yoga medicine 500-hour yoga. Why can't I get that out,
Yep.
Yenny? Yoga medicine therapeutic specialist. Okay, third time's the charm. There we go. And then as I started doing more yoga, I realized there was kind of pieces
I
missing
can't
in
hear
my
you.
movement practice and started to get more into strength training. And then long story short, that led me to working with women with osteoporosis. And I just really loved the practice of turning a somewhat scary diagnosis into something that feels really empowering. And then we partnered with Kari to take this into a virtual setting from an in-person setting so we could reach more people and support more women with osteoporosis. So that's what brings us here today.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Michaela. I think the issue might be that you have too many credentials and they're all wordy. So they,
Too
yeah,
much to remember. Yeah.
exactly.
Having
Yeah.
a very Monday speaking kind of Monday.
Happens to us all. Kenny, you're conveniently unmuted. Would you like to introduce yourself next?
Of course, yeah. So I'm Ken Rhodes. I'm one of the senior coaches here at Kari. I work with Michaela in the in-person program, so that's kind of how I got my foot in the door with osteoporosis. And my background is purely strength and conditioning based, and I'm always fascinated with learning more about the strength and conditioning world, and you can never know enough about it. So diving into this osteoporosis world has been awesome and eye-opening, and I really enjoy working with all of my clients throughout the cohort that we do and post cohort as well. So looking forward to meeting you and hearing all of your questions today. And yeah, I'm also a BoneFit certified personal trainer as well. And I have several years of experience working with osteoporotic patients as well. So,
Perfect. Thanks so
yeah,
much,
of
Kenny.
course.
Karen, would you like to go next?
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Karen. And like Michaela, I came from a yoga background initially. I always kind of worked with slightly older clientele. And as we were all aging, people are starting to become diagnosed with osteoporosis. So I I'm a personal trainer also, but my focus was always on yoga, and that kind of forced me to change where I put my attention so that I could start helping my clients with their bone density. So I am BoneFit certified. I'm a movement mechanics specialist and a whole bunch of other things just because I love doing this. So I look forward to hearing your questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Karen. And last but certainly not least, Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'm new to the Kari team, but I have been working with yoga and strength training for years. I'm also a yoga medicine therapeutic specialist and a silver sneakers instructor. So I teach a lot of our at our community center, a lot of strength and a lot of yoga with some accommodations. We always figure out how to make it work for our aging population. So excited to be here and hear some questions.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. Thanks everybody that's continuing to join the call. It's so lovely to see you all here. If you're just joining us, again, you're welcome to unmute yourself at any time to ask questions. This is a friendly, informal, interactive environment. There are no stupid questions. And you can also type your question into the chat at any time. I did want to mention that this session is being recorded and we share it via our newsletter to our community, to all of our subscribers. So if you would prefer for your voice or your face to not be on the recording, then please feel free to just use the chat and keep yourself muted and off camera if that is your preference. So we already have a really good question in the chat. Karen, I have a feeling this one's going to be up your alley. But Randy is asking, in a study that showed that jumping helped build bones, the participants waited 30 seconds between each jump. Do you think that long a wait time is necessary? How often can I jump? Do I need rest days like when lifting weights?
Yeah, this is a great question. Wow, we're really diving right in, huh? So yeah, as far as jumping goes, waiting in between individual jumps, there are different schools of research on that, and I'm not going to say that there's one specific conclusion, but there is research to show that you need to, you can just do maybe 10 jumps or 20 jumps at a time. Because what happens is once your bones get some stimulation, they kind of perk up initially. They recognize that some new input is coming in, but after a while, they start to kind of tune that out. I know Michaela loves to use the car alarm analogy, kind of like a car alarm going off in the background. Your body starts to kind of tune that noise out. And it's the same thing with impact training. So you do a few jumps, you're better off kind of spreading them out through the day versus doing a whole bunch of jumping all at once. I always say to treat it kind of like breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a couple of snacks in between, doing 10 jumps. So it's pretty quick. And then I don't think the wait time is necessary in between each jump per se. That's something you can do every single day. There's a lot of research that shows that the more often you're doing that, the better. So somewhere between 4 and 7 times a week. And then in terms of rest days when weight training, it depends on how you're training. In general, you don't have to take rest days in between training sessions, but you wouldn't necessarily train the same exact skill on back-to-back days. So you just want to make sure that you're recovering well in between your weight training sessions. If you're noticing that you're not, then you might need to look at something like spreading them out or changing the intensity of your programming. But that's highly individual, and that kind of old advice that you can't train on back-to-back days is kind of outdated.
Yeah, these are all such good points, Karen, and I think it's really useful to distinguish between like the break being for rest and recovery purposes versus the break being with the intention of keeping the stimulus novel and like interesting for the target tissues. And that actually brings us to another really good frequently asked question. This one is actually, I just made some notes based on social media comments that we had received on some of our posts and videos recently. So somebody asked, what size weights are you using in the video that showed me doing some strength training movements? And the answer, of course, is I'm using weights that I'm adapted for, but are a little bit challenging to me, which means it's completely subjective. But I'm wondering if maybe Kenny, you can talk about this concept of progressive overload and how that's a really critical factor in keeping the stimulus effective for our bone density gains as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Yanni. So, yeah, progressive overload. Again, I think all of us on this call wish it was progressive loading instead of progressive overloading. That concept gets a lot of fear mongering behind it. So, take out the over, think of it as a progressive loading. And the goal really is to start at one point, at one weight, and end at another. And the way we approach it here at CAR is very incremental. So, if you're starting an exercise at 5 pounds and then progressing through 1 month of programming, maybe you've added 2 or 3 pounds to that exercise by the end of it. So the progressive loading takes time and consistency for it to be effective. And trying not to compare yourself to anyone else is very important in this process, just like Annie indicated. So making sure that we allow time for the body to adapt and recover to the loads that we're placing it under is really in a nutshell how progressive overloading works. So starting at one weight and then progressing to maybe it doesn't always have to be weight as well. It could be more working sets. It could be less rest periods. It could be drop sets, which is techniques that we use here at Kari as well. So long story short, trying to start at one weight that is applicable to you and that you can achieve the workout, and then progressing to a higher weight in a certain time period. So that time period does change depending on lots of other circumstances as well. So yeah, hopefully I hit the nail on the head for that one there, Yanni. If there's anything to add, someone else can jump in as well.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a perfect explanation. We really want to have that progression built into our approach and our strategy because otherwise, maintaining bone density and even muscle strength are calorically, energetically, and nutritionally very expensive processes in the body. And our bodies are always trying to be very economical in how they function. So if we don't have that incentive of a new, interesting, novel stimulus being applied to the tissues, your body's going to be very reluctant to use these finite resources to build these very like hard to maintain tissues like bone and muscle. So we have to like keep them on their toes a little bit in order to keep them adapting in the way that we want. Really great question here from Karen. Can you reverse osteoporosis with strength training? I work out 3 to 4 times a week strength training, but my bone density still declined. So, in answer to your first part, some medical professionals would tell you that you can't reverse osteoporosis. However, we have seen even just in the last couple of weeks, multiple clients who have been in our program for long enough got back in touch with us to tell us their DEXA score improvements at their follow-up scan, and multiple have reversed in osteoporosis back into osteopenia using just strength training, no pharmaceutical intervention. So we can tell you anecdotally that it is absolutely possible. Michaela, I'm going to have you tackle the second part. There's definitely just like any other uh, training goal, bone density requires some specific inputs in order for you to get to that goal. So, Karen, Michaela, excuse me, maybe you can talk a little bit about where people might be falling short in terms of bone density, even though they're actively strength training.
Yeah, so the bones need a very specific kind of loading, and we also want to make sure that we're loading the bones that were most are most affected by osteoporosis. So what that means is that we're looking at loading the bones of the wrists, the spine, and the hips. And the type of loading that the bones really respond well to is a compressive force. So unlike the muscles like to get stretched, and that's what causes them to get stronger, is that tensile loading. Bones actually like to get compressed. So that's that kind of force of gravity, or the first force of the external load coming down and pushing those bones together and kind of creating a smushing effect between the two bones. And that smushing is what tells the bones that they need to get stronger in response to that so they can better withstand that pressure the next time it comes around. So when we think about osteoporosis, we're really looking for something called axial loading, which is that loading through the axis of the body, which is going to be your spine. So that top down loading. And that's going to come from very specific exercises that we choose. So anything that holds the weight overhead is going to create that axial load. Anything that holds the weight on the shoulders, or even though this is a little bit harder to picture, holding them down by the sides, because as Karen likes to say, your arms are attached to your shoulders sit above, the shoulder girdle sits above the spine and creates that push down to create that healthy compression. So what we actually see this happen a lot with active people and people who are strength training, where they might not be kind of putting enough of that specific type of load through the body to see improvements in bone density, especially in the places that are getting the DEXA scan. So reviewing the exercises that you're doing, looking at that axial load. And then we also like to point out too that a lot of the kind of exercise machines that you see at the gym are not going to be the most effective for osteoporosis because they're really lacking that axial loading component. And then they also kind of miss the mark on a few other things like balance and posture that you can get from using free weights. So I hope that hits the big picture and let me know if you want me to expand on anything.
Yeah, I think that's great, Michaela. And again, like we already mentioned, the exercise selection needs to be specific and then it has to vary and progress. Otherwise, you're just staying with a stimulus that you're already adapted to. And subsequently, your body is not going to have a meaningful incentive to use these finite resources to lay down new tissue. And as Michaela mentioned, it is actually quite surprising how many of our incoming clients report that they've been strength training and they have not increased their bone density or they've maybe even lost bone density. And when we dig a little bit more into what they've been doing, it's often incorrect exercise selection, lack of progression, or they're using machines at the gym which lack that axial compressive loading. So hopefully that answers the question. Great question from Carrie. Sarah, maybe you can tackle this one. Do you have to have been diagnosed with osteoporosis to join the program, or can you join the program for preventative reasons? I'm asking because I'm looking for a program that incorporates strength training. I'm 58 years old, but have only been doing yoga and walking, but haven't done my yoga because I had rotator cuff surgery a year ago and have been motivated. So I'm looking for a program that will help me start back up. So first, I'll answer that first question. We do not require you to have a diagnosis in order to join the program. The fact that you're concerned about your bone density and wanting to proactively take care of that is awesome, and that would be absolutely a fantastic reason to start a program like ours. Sarah, maybe you can talk a little bit about how we might accommodate or approach somebody who has had like a recent-ish but healed surgery and is looking to build strength back up in like this conservative, gradual way using strength training.
Yeah, this actually sounds like a nice fit for you because you've been doing yoga, and we certainly do incorporate some of that yoga. And so when we have somebody with an injury, because it does happen a lot, people come to us with lots of conditions and lots of injuries, and we're able to work with almost everybody, it seems. And so it's really sort of meeting you where you are, so what is a challenge for you now? And then how do we help you build safely? And so if you're just working on rotation, we can do that without weights. If you're ready to add weights, we can figure out a way to add weights safely. We can always sort of modify exercises. You're like, I'm not taking my arm overhead. All right, we can find another way to build some strength and through shoulders and work on that mobility and flexibility as well. Walking is great. We get to practice the farmer's carry, which is the kind of walk here in the program. And
It's a progressively loaded walk, which is exactly what we want. Yeah.
Exactly. Did I answer the question?
I think so. I mean, I think the main takeaway is that, we have many clients. In fact, I would say the overwhelming majority come with a complaint in addition to their osteoporosis. That's kind of part and parcel of this phase of life for many of us. So everybody that you see here on screen is extremely experienced and habituated to adjusting and modifying for these kinds of injuries, joint replacements, prior surgeries, mobility limitations, and strengthening the muscles that move and stabilize all of your joints is only going to have a beneficial effect in all of these scenarios. And of course, the criteria there is that you work with an experienced coach who is able to create that experience for you and personalize things for you. Are there any cautions to jumping if you have osteoporosis? So same as anything else, we would want to go meet you where you're at and then progress from there. Kenny, maybe you can talk a little bit about how we start with impact training in our program and how there's ways to progress and regress all of these things depending on individual needs.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, impact is a decent part of our program, and we want to get that ground force reaction from the ground up. That's really what we're aiming for. So, to answer your question, yes, like we do want to start out pretty small, and that can be something like a calf raise heel drop, where we're just energetically dropping the heels towards the ground, the hard surface underneath. Um, we can externally load that as well with a weight vest or weights in the hand. We can also just regress it to a simple stomp, right? Just the simple act of stomping on the ground. We call those multi-directional stomps. And in just doing that and getting that pun intended feet wet kind of feeling here as we get some impact in. And then we can progress that to the calf raise heel drop. We can progress that with added weight. You will not see anything like a box jump in our program just due to the extensive coordination and the high risk that is. But there are lots of ways to get that impact through that ground force reaction, that impact that we're looking for, and doing it in a safe, controlled manner as well. So, yeah, excellent question. You don't want to dive into it too quickly and do too much and bruise our heels, but we want to stimulate that reaction through the feet and up through the knees and into the hips. Yep.
Yeah, that's a great way to explain it. And I think in general, it's useful to consider the scenarios in which injury occurs, right? So whether we're talking about bone, ligaments, tendons, or muscle, we suffer an injury anytime we load these tissues in a way that exceeds their current load tolerance capacity. So with anything, that applies to bones as well. So we kind of want to see we have a very thorough intake and onboarding process. We do a movement assessment as part of the intro meeting. So we get lots of information about like where you're at and what your capabilities are. And then we meet you where you're at with suitable stimulus. And the whole point is this kind of threading the needle approach where we want to provide enough meaningful stimulus and challenge that the tissues that we're targeting are like, oh, she's going to stomp her foot like this again, probably tomorrow. We should lay down some new, denser bone tissue to make sure that this is safe for us. And then as your tolerance increases with more bone density, then you can stomp more. You can withstand more impact. So it becomes like this positive feedback loop rather than what we tend to see often in people who have become very afraid to move, where they're just losing density, muscle strength, capacity, movement capabilities because they're moving less. So all of that strength disappears because your body is adapting to it. Great question from Esther about whether resistance bands can be used in place of weights. Yes, in some instances. Michaela, maybe do you want to talk about this a bit?
Yeah, I would say they can be used in combination with weights. So resistance bands are going to be one, a little bit harder to progress the way that you can progress with weights. And then they're also going to be missing out on some of the loading that we're really trying to target with osteoporosis. And at a certain point, you really just can't get enough of that loading through resistance bands, and especially that targeted loading of that axial compressive force. You're not going to be able to replicate that with resistance bands in the same way that you can using dumbbells or other, like a barbell if you're so inclined, other weights that are available. So with resistance bands, they do have a place and we do use them in our program, but they are not going to provide the same axial load that free weights can.
So kind of an icing on the cake rather than the meat and potatoes of the meal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're great. They serve a certain function and we use them for very specific things, but they're not going to check all the boxes.
Great answer. Karen, guess what? I saved this question for you. Sherry is asking, do you work with osteoporosis, scoliosis, and spinal fusion people? I have all three. Do you suggest different training methods? I do what feels good for me now.
Yeah, the reason this question is tossed to me is because I also have scoliosis. I have a fairly severe S-shaped curve and I strength train. And what you'll find in our program is strength training that supports your whole core. And anything that helps to support and stabilize the core is going to help support and stabilize your spine because that's where all of those core muscles are. So spinal stabilization and knowing how to maintain a neutral spine as you strength train is one of the primary components of our program and one of the things that we really emphasize from the get-go. So it's absolutely appropriate for people who have low back issues, scoliosis, spinal fusion. And like Yanni has emphasized a few times, we just want to make sure we're meeting you as an individual where you are, taking your concerns into account and loading in a way that is really progressive and takes your issues into consideration, whatever they may be, whether it's a spinal issue or some other kind of injury.
Yeah, and actually, that's a great question, Sherry, because you listed three spinal conditions. But if you were to look through our intake forms, and see the concerns that people list as they come into the program, you would probably find every other spinal condition listed in there as well, and all of them benefit from better strength and mobility and stability from the muscles that support, move, stabilize the spine, which includes the muscles that actually line the spine, the deep and the more superficial movement muscles, as well as the muscles of the core. So all of it is broadly beneficial. Vibration plates are such a controversial issue for many people. How do you feel about them? So we actually don't think they're controversial at all because there is no research supporting them as an effective intervention. So it's a very clear-cut answer from us on that. Some people do really like them, but again, they do not provide the axial loading or the progressive overload. They don't check those boxes, and they don't target the bones that we would want them to target in any specific way. So we do not recommend them unless you personally enjoy using them, just for other reasons. Sarah, maybe you can tackle this one. So this is a good question from Anne. Would headstands be considered axial loading for the spine? Um, I guess technically yes, although I don't know that this would be recommended.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a yoga teacher and I don't ever do headstands. I don't teach them for my class. I don't think a lot of people have the, strength to do them safely. So it's not something that I would use for this purpose, especially. I think there's other ways that we can get the axle loading through the spine, which will be safer. Um, so yes, maybe, but we're not going to see them here.
And you wouldn't want to hold a headstand for the amount of time that would be required to get this stimulus. And I think it's useful to also keep in mind that the structure of the spine very much evolved for the orientation and gravity that we use it for, which is this way up. So the vertebrae at the bottom of the spine are much larger and thicker because they are bearing the load of the entire spinal column, torso, and head, whereas the vertebrae at your neck are much smaller and almost like dainty and not fragile exactly, but they're just a lot more delicate looking because they're bearing a lot less load. So our spines were, while a headstand isn't necessarily dangerous, I would say for most healthy people, your spine still was not made specifically to tolerate load in that orientation for extended periods of time. And we would certainly, want to exercise caution if there's low bone density involved as well. For someone with low back pain now, and then would you recommend Romanian deadlifts or even split Romanian deadlifts over conventional deadlifts? So we can't really recommend any exercise for anybody in the context of a group Zoom meeting without knowing a lot more about you. So that would be something that we would need to be like engaged in a client-provider relationship with you before we could make that kind of individualized recommendation. Excellent question from Kara. How do you target hips and wrists? I see Michaela nodding already. I understand axial loading for the spine and use hand weights over my head, but I am not likely addressing my hips and wrists. Do push-ups provide axial loading on wrists? What exercises focus on the hips?
That for me.
Yes. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah.
Right.
I love how critically you're thinking. So, and that you're taking the information and being like, how do I put this together? So when you are axial loading your spine, it is going to come down and target those hips as well. But that being said, the spine is going to get the majority of that load because it's just kind of first in line of the where the load is passing through. So that's why we love to use impact. So I realize that we've talked about impact quite a bit already on this call, but we didn't really clarify exactly why we use it. So impact is basically like axial loading, but instead of being from the top down, it's coming from the ground up. And so then your hips get that input before your spine does. So that makes it a really great way of creating that loading to the hips. So you kind of get those hips in both directions. And that's why we do use loading plus impact to get both the spine and the hips. And then you're spot on with a weight being overhead, providing that axial load through the wrists, as well as something like a push up, because again, well, we're turning our bodies kind of to the floor and putting our hands underneath us. Now we're taking that axial load in a push-up position. You won't be getting it through the spine anymore because you've changed your spine's orientation with gravity and weight. But now you're going to be putting that load into the wrists and the forearms. So anything where you're in tabletop, push up, plank pose, and you're really loading onto the hands, that's going to target the bones around the wrists or the forearms as well. And then in terms of the hips, I also always like to say that it's important. The reason why we include a lot of like unilateral type of exercises in our program is because it's going to put a little bit more emphasis on each hip individually. So if you're doing a lunge with the left foot forward, you're going to be placing a little bit more emphasis on that left hip. And then vice versa, when you do it with the right foot forward, you're going to be placing a little bit more of that loading and emphasis around the right hip. So you can get those hips through loading them through things like squats, lunges, step ups, and then, of course, the impact exercises that send that vibration from the ground up into the hips.
Perfect. Such a thorough answer. Thanks, Michaela. I think it's also really cool to kind of think about, there's a reason why the spine and the hips respond to slightly different stimulus, right? And that's because they were designed to withstand different types of loading and different movements. So our spine, like I explained, is like thicker on the bottom and thinner at the top, and that is because it evolved to withstand like loading in this orientation to gravity. And our hips, conversely, are a ball and socket joint that have a pretty large range of motion in terms of how much they can rotate. So our hips really love being loaded in all of those positions that they function in. And with something like impact training and hopping and stomping, we actually have the opportunity, and like Michaela mentioned, like a lunge with one foot forward, the other foot back. We have the opportunity to provide loading from all different directions and all different positions. So it becomes a really very impactful way to actually target the hips and get that loading in there as well. Um, Excellent question from Tammy. To complete this program and keep progressing, I'm wondering if I would need to purchase a whole bunch of weights for home use, or would I complete exercises at a gym? I think it could be really either whichever feels the best for you. And we obviously love it when people need to buy heavier weights. That's like a really, really good thing. Um, do you provide nutritional coaching and guidance for osteoporosis, eating foods with calcium and other foods with magnesium, vitamin K to maximize absorption? Yes, great question, Karen. So we provide general guidance around nutrition requirements for good bone remodeling, as well as like the caloric changes that people often experience, like in terms of how much they need to eat in conjunction with starting a resistance training routine, because then we need to also make sure we're fueled adequately for that. The guidance that we provide in the program around that is generalized because obviously specific supplementation would depend on your personal nutritional profile. So we can't give individualized guidance about that. But Michaela is a nutritional therapy practitioner who can do that kind of thing. So if you're interested in working with somebody, she's your gal. Tammy's asking, would playing tennis be advised and provide the impact training just discussed? Karen, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. Yeah. It depends on how kind of aggressively you're playing tennis. But one of the things we know is that your bones kind of get bored with the same thing over and over again. And when you're playing tennis, it's kind of like people who are runners. Even though there's impact with running, because you're doing the same mechanical loading over and over again, your body gets very used to that. And after a certain point, no more adaptation takes place. So if you're a regular tennis player already and you're finding that you have low bone density, continuing to do that same thing isn't necessarily going to make a change. But if you're starting tennis after having not done something like that, you may see some improvement in your bone density from something like that. But it is a form of impact. And you also get this nice kind of change of direction when you're playing tennis and your bones kind of like that input of force coming from different angles and directions. So that can be really helpful too. And doing that is actually really great for your balance and can help to prevent falls. So, maintaining mobility, agility, like is required in tennis, is really great and helpful for people who have low bone density, especially if it's something that, that you enjoy doing.
Yeah, again, it comes back to this notion of like, does it include meaningful amounts of axial loading, and does it include the progression that needed for that axial loading to stay interesting and relevant for the bones? And most body weight modalities do not. But all that being said, there's definitely benefit to like being active and playing a sport that challenges your other movement capabilities like coordination and balance. It's just really useful to get super clear on what each thing can do in terms of like either bone density or some other aspect of fracture risk reduction, and then where you need to go elsewhere to get the missing pieces. Oh, Sarah, I think this one is for you. I practice yoga every day and have for years. I have read not to do forward folds, hang my head, round my spine at all, like in the cat portion of cat cow or in twists. This is hard for me to understand because I like how those asanas feel and I am flexible. Should I eliminate those from a yoga practice for bone health? It is near impossible to find a yoga teacher who knows much at all or ever mentioned safe yoga practice for low bone density. Yeah, sadly, this is true. So I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to ask the experts here. Well, we're really glad to have you. Thank you. Sarah, maybe you can expand on this a little bit.
Yeah, and then I might hand it over to Karen as well. You will, in some of our yoga practice, you will see things like twists. We always bring up safety, and so finding safe ways to move with your body and what your body needs. When we do forward folds, but it's more of a hip hinge. So the action is happening from the hip with a nice long spine rather than a rounding or rolling. I don't have space behind me, but I don't know, Karen, if that's what you could show us, a hip hinge. So that I think that there are ways that we incorporate some of these yoga stretches, always keeping in mind safety of the spine and how we're moving.
Yeah, and I think maybe Michaela, you can tack on like we are not proponents of eliminating entire movement categories that overall, when done in a reasonable and controlled manner, actually contribute to your overall tissue health, including the tissues that support and stabilize your spine. So we want to maintain the strength there. We often talk about how the discs in between your vertebrae, these are avascular, meaning they don't have direct blood flow and they rely on their health, the kind of thickness of the discs, by imbibing fluid from the surrounding tissues. And that imbibing mechanism happens when we move our bodies and the discs get like a little bit smushed back and forth between the vertebrae. So the discs are essentially your spine's built-in fracture prevention mechanism, and we want to keep them healthy. And the way to do that is by moving. Of course, we need to take certain precautions when somebody has low bone density, but overall, the benefits far outweigh the risks in a situation where we're doing very, very careful, controlled, mindful movement with adequate muscular control without pushing into like deep, uncomfortable ranges of motion. I know that's not like a clear, yes, you should do this, and no, you shouldn't do that answer. Um, Karen is asking if the program is one-on-one and online. Kenny, maybe you can talk us through some of the logistics of how the program works, how each client is interacting with their coaches, the group Zoom meetings, all of that.
Yeah, definitely. So we kick things off with an introductory week where we get a chance to meet everybody that's in your cohort. And then from there, we dive into each of the fundamental movements of the program. You have an opportunity to do an assessment and film yourself and send it directly to your coach. And then your coach does have one-on-one interaction with you, um, at all times as needed. So you can reach out to them directly. You can send the videos and upload them. We have those weekly Zoom meetings. I would say there are 8 in total throughout the 13 weeks where we meet just about every week. And when we talk about all the aspects of the training, the exercises themselves, we also have opportunities that are more informal for you to ask questions and we really like to build relationships within the cohort. So meeting with peers and talking about different things. I just had this lengthy discussion about Osteo Boost the other day in one of my cohorts, and several of the people have the Osteo Boost, and we're talking about how much they like it. So, you have this opportunity, yes, one-on-one to work with the coach, and we have private message functions. We also have the opportunity for myself and even Michaela to chime in and answer yoga specific questions. So, with all that being said, there's a big community aspect, and there's also the one-on-one, private aspect of the program as well.
Yeah, exactly. So you are basically, each client is in private communication daily with their coach, and they're being prompted for feedback. We want to know how many reps you did, at what weight, how difficult it felt on a scale of 1 to 10, how you recovered the next day. Could you have done more reps? Did you need to take a lighter weight and switch to that in between? So all of that feedback and that information is essentially giving your coach a very detailed and nuanced idea of not just your current capabilities, but how your body is responding to the exercise stimulus. And that's the information that then allows them to make those individual recommendations. But most people really also enjoy the community aspect, the group aspect of the program, because you're getting to experience this thing together with a whole bunch of other people who are going through the same program as you.
I'll also add that all the meetings are recorded as well. So if you're unable to attend one of them, we send that out to you in depth, and you can, on your own time, watch the recording and catch up on any concepts you may have missed as well.
Thanks, Kenny. If we do heel dropping, how many should we do at a time? Good question. That would depend on a whole bunch of individual variables about you that we don't know and can't really answer in this context. Sorry. Good question from Sherry. I have heard that fusions do not protect against fractures and that they occur more with the hardware. Is that what the data shows that you know of? Who wants to tackle this one? Karen, maybe?
I mean, so I don't know what the data shows about fractures necessarily, but I do know that when you have a spinal fusion, people tend to have issues with the next joint above and below the fusion because when your spine is fused and you have limited movement through a certain segment of your spine, now all of that happens above and below the fusion point. So I do know that in people who have fusions, those can tend to be a little bit more vulnerable, but I don't know in terms necessarily of fracture risk how that would happen. I don't know if Michaela or somebody else has. Is that something you're familiar
So
with?
I can add just again anecdotally from our partners here locally at Emerge Ortho, who are the largest physician-owned orthopedic chain in the state of North Carolina, that they actually have implemented new policies around bone density testing for anybody going in for a spinal surgery that includes hardware. Because when the bone density is not good, the hardware doesn't stick. It just ends up like crumbling out of the bone. And of course, that is not a good outcome for the patient, who subsequently then is in a lot of pain and requires a second surgery. So, to answer your question, and I don't know if this really does answer your question, but the more progressive, forward thinking surgeons now are requiring bone density testing, and that bone density be at a good level before they'll go in and do this kind of surgery, because the hardware has a harder time staying put in porous bone. That would definitely be a good question for your orthopedist or spinal surgeon. Um, are you familiar with OsteoStrong, and do you think it is effective? Great question. This is less about what we think and more about what the research shows, and the research shows that it is We currently do not have research suggesting that it is effective. And the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation has actually gone out of their way to state that they do not endorse the OsteoStrong method due to the lack of high quality research on it. It's also really, really expensive for what you get, which is not very much. And it doesn't include any of the benefits of a functional movement training program. Does anybody want to add? We could go off on this tangent for a while, I know.
Yeah, the primary thing I like to point out is that it hasn't been proven safe. So they have self-published studies and self-funded studies, but there's no research demonstrating that it's actually a safe modality.
Yeah, and the other big gripe that people have with it, researchers and clinicians, is that while OsteoStrong does correctly use this principle of axial loading, that compressive loading that we've mentioned a couple of times, it's delivered in such small and infrequent doses that it cannot be effective to stimulate those bone density adaptations that we're after. It would be a little bit like if you wanted to train for a marathon, but you only ran for 5 minutes once a week, that would not make you strong in a way that would allow you to complete the marathon. So it's the same with OsteoStrong. It significantly underdoses the desired mechanical stimulus in relation to the goals that we're going for. Great question about whether walking, what does that do to help bones impact any axial loading? Sarah, would you like to tackle that one?
Sorry, mute button.
Okay.
So again, it depends, right? You're going to hear that a lot, but if you weren't doing any walking and you started walking, there might be a little benefit to the impact. But again, you have to think about dose. You might be referring to wearing a weight vest while walking. We've seen that. Again, sort of hard to say how much of the benefit of walking is from the impact from the ground up or from wearing a weight vest and getting the axial loading from the top down. Again, I think it's like, what is your goal? I don't think walking is a bad thing. Is it enough to help those bones grow? Probably not.
I believe we have a research document that we send out to people anytime that they're interested in seeing some of the research on exercise for bone density. And one of the studies on it is literally titled, "Walking does not prevent bone loss in postmenopausal women." So that answers. And again, walking has a lot of good other health benefits, but it's useful to understand the limitations. Not a meaningful amount of axial loading, very little progression. So unless you find a way to make the walking more challenging in the sense that it's providing more compressive loading, then it's not going to be your go-to intervention for osteoporosis. Great question here from Suzanne. How heavy do weights have to be to see improvement? This is almost like a philosophical question. Michaela, do you want to tackle this one?
Sure. So they have to be hard enough that it's a novel stimulus for you. And then, like we've mentioned before, that is going to have to progress as you become adapted to it. So I know that there's a lot of like talk on social media about everybody having to lift heavy, and that's the only way to improve osteoporosis. That's not necessarily the case. We really need to look at the person in front of us, what they're coming in how they're coming in. So are they coming in from being very deconditioned? They've never lifted weights before. Going straight into a heavy lifting protocol is not going to work well for them versus someone who has been lifting maybe for a long time and they just need to kind of fine tune, like we talked about earlier, their approach for bone density. They will likely be able to start at a much heavier weight than the person I kind of described before that. So we need to look at the person in front of us, but we need to find a weight that feels challenging but doable. And you should be kind of doing enough reps that you find the point of kind of almost failure, where you're like 1 to 3 reps shy of kind of failing the movement where you can't complete it anymore. So that's going to look different exercise to exercise and person to person. So we really can't give you a nice, neat answer here, but heavy enough to feel challenging. And then we need to progress that once that starts to feel a little bit easier.
Perfect answer. Thanks so much. And this is where that one-on-one communication with your coach is really crucial because they can help you to determine based on how things are feeling when it's either too challenging or not challenging enough and how to keep you like threading that needle of keeping things novel for your bones. Can a wall sit or staying in a horse stance help build bones? So First of all, these are both body weight movements, so there's no significant axial loading beyond what you're already adapted for. And unless you load those movements, then there's also no progression in the loading. If you're asking about whether staying in that pose for longer is helpful, then doing something for longer is a question of endurance rather than strength. So the short answer is no. Um, Tammy has a great question. How many days a week is the program? In general, how long is a session per day? Karen, maybe you can talk us through a typical week in the program.
Sure. So you get programming 6 days a week. That includes 4 days of strength training, 1 day of yoga, and one active recovery day. And then you have 1 day that's entirely off. Those are usually days that we reserve for our group meetings when they happen. So a strength training session, we ask you to leave about 90 minutes when the program first starts, because if you're new to strength training, there is a little bit of a learning curve that you're going to have to go through so that you can become familiar with the exercises in the program itself, how to progress. You're going to be communicating with your coaches a little bit more at the beginning because you're probably going to have some questions that need to be answered. So that's usually about 90 minutes, but what we find is about halfway through the program, maybe a little bit less than halfway through the program, that tends to drop down closer to about an hour. The yoga days are about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on the specific yoga practice. And then the restorative or recovery day is actually kind of like a menu selection. You'll have 3 different options to choose from. You can do all 3 options, or you can do your own thing, or you could just pick 1 or 2 of them. And that, if you did all of them, would take about half an hour. So it just kind of depends on how you want to approach your recovery day. And then you have an entire day off at some point. And I know that sounds like a lot, but it's really just to help you get into a really nice habit and start building a very strong foundation going forward with your strength training.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning too that the workouts are movable within the week, and we actually encourage people to really deliberately think about like how they're going to place their workouts throughout the week so that it really works for them. So your busier days, those are perfect for either having your day off, your yoga day, or your recovery day, and then your less busy days are great for the more time-consuming strength training workouts, which are really, like we mentioned, the meat and potatoes of the program. Judith has a great question. You mentioned some clients like OsteoBoost. How does it work? It doesn't appear to compress bones or provide axial loading. I love that you're thinking about this so critically. So yes, this is a great question. You're right. It doesn't provide compression or axial loading. What it's doing is that it's targeted vibration therapy that mimics the stimulus of impact and axial compressive loading. So it's like kind of artificially and in a very focused and targeted, directed way, putting that stimulus into the lumbar sacral region, which is your basically your low back, your sacrum, and your hips, which are the most common sites of bone density loss. And this technology was actually developed to help astronauts in space maintain bone density because they're floating around with no gravity, so they're losing bone density all the time. And of course, they can't do really like weights are weightless in space, and there's no gravity to use for impact. So they developed this technology to help astronauts maintain some bone density while they're there. I hope that answers your question. And another thing worth mentioning about OsteoBoost is that, they have FDA clearance based on some very high quality research that was conducted on their device, and it did show it to reduce the rate at which bone density is being lost, which is a little bit different from what strength training does, which is to actually produce and lay down new, denser, stronger bone tissue. Somebody in one of our consults today asked about this, and like we tell people that resistance training and OsteoBoost are a fantastic combination, and we actually did a webinar with them back in November for this exact reason. You can find that on our YouTube channel. Tammy's following up on your response. Oh, perfect. Thanks, Karen. beat me to it. Um, uh, let's talk about weighted vests a little bit. Who wants to tackle this one?
Want me to go? So weighted vests in and of themselves, like taking a walk with a weighted vest, there's no research to support that for bone density. If you've been online and you've seen influencers encourage you to take a walk with a weighted vest, and then they list a bunch of research that demonstrates that it works, the research doesn't exactly say what they are saying it does say. Instead, a lot of those research studies were multimodal, meaning that people wore weight vests and they might have been walking for part of the time, but oftentimes they were also doing impact or resistance training or both of those things. So there's no research right now that demonstrates that a weighted vest is helpful just by itself. In fact, there's one research study that directly compared walking with a weighted vest on a treadmill to walking without, and there was no difference between the two groups who participated in the study. The way that we use weighted vests in our program is the way that research has shown that it is helpful, which is to add a little bit of loading for impact training. And it can actually help with balance to wear a weighted vest while doing some balance training. So that's the way that we actually approach using it in our program. Kind of like resistance bands. It's a little bit like the cherry on top, but not necessarily the meat and potatoes of the meal. But we use it in the way that the research does show that it is helpful.
Perfect. Yeah. Icing on the cake, not the meat and potatoes. And Tammy, I hope that answers your question a little bit further down the chat about yes, we do use the weighted vest in our program, but we use it based on the ways that the research has shown it to be effective, which is not as a standalone intervention for bone density. What are your thoughts on adding light ankle or wrist weights when walking in terms of bone health?
I'll tackle it since
Yeah,
this
go right ahead.
it's pretty much the same as wearing a weighted vest. So if wearing a weighted vest while you're walking isn't helpful, adding ankle weights or wrist weights isn't going to help either. Wrist weights add a little bit of axial loading. Ankle weights do not add any axial loading at all. They're at the wrong end of your body because they're all the way down to the bottom. So the ankle weights are not going to be helpful there at all.
Yeah, they're incorrectly positioned relative to the target tissue. Oh, we hear this one every once in a while. Walking up steep hills would provide more axial loading, I'm assuming, enough to make some impact on bone density, or would that be an add-on exercise and not one of the main ways of loading, in addition to squats, hand weights, etc.? So changing the angle of incline, I think, has been shown to maybe make the exercise more challenging in some ways, but you haven't increased the amount of axial loading, unfortunately. You're definitely getting a better glute workout. Um, let's see. Um, what kind of equipment do we need to get started, assuming bone mass is low? Um, Kenny, would you like to talk us through the basic equipment needs and how we kind of help people determine what's a good starting point for them in terms of weight choices?
Yeah, definitely. So right off the bat, the intake is like kind of the first way that we get to learn about you and your previous experiences with weight training, where you're at with your bone density. You're going to hopefully provide your DEXA scans to us as well, and any other pertinent information about prior surgeries or medical history. And that's going to kind of get us started down the path of where we need to load and what we need to buy. We do have we have I answered this in the chat, but we have a standard equipment list that we will send you. It's typically, a couple sets of different dumbbells or kettlebells, a yoga mat, a step, a weighted vest, some resistance bands, and kind of the basic things to get going. And then from there, what really diving into the weights is really nuanced and specific to you. I think we generally recommend, like a couple of different options up to 10 pounds, a set of 15s. And then from there, we kind of rely on your experience with weight training. So if you've been someone that's worked out before, and you've already lifted well beyond 15 pounds, then, you're going to need access to that. If you're completely new to strength training, I think that what we recommend is a great starting point. And like Yenny said earlier, one of our favorite things is to hear that clients have to go out and purchase new equipment because that's a sign of growth and adaptation. And then also access to a local gym is a great way to get more equipment and more content and have the ability to not have to spend as much money on a home gym. We understand it gets expensive. So I always recommend adjustable dumbbells to people or adjustable kettlebells. They're an awesome way to save space. They're a little expensive up front. But if you have the space and the capital, it is a great way to go anywhere from 5 upwards to some of them go up to 55 pounds and beyond. That's a lot, but there are adjustable options out there as well. But yeah, we'll provide a standard equipment list, and then from there, working with your coach to kind of develop the nuanced equipment needs for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, as part of our onboarding packet, which everybody receives when they register, we do send out a very thorough equipment list that includes direct links to each individual item. And that is also the point in time where your coach becomes available to give you advice based on your unique situation and your intake form. So they'll be happy to advise you on what's going to be the best choice for you. Um, and yes, thank you, Michaela and Karen, for hopping in on the question about Osteo Boost versus Osteo Strong, two very, very different things there. Um,
I just want
so
to I just wanted to add that Osteo Boost, I believe, is only FDA cleared for osteopenia as well,
yeah,
not osteoporosis as well, just to clarify.
that's exactly right. So the study that they did was on women with osteopenia. Um, uh, People sometimes ask if it would be effective for osteoporosis as well. And our view is that the mechanism of bone remodeling is similar enough that there's no reason to think that it wouldn't be effective, but we just don't have the research right now to like make that claim, really. I'm sure that they will do more research, even though, research usually takes forever and is very, very expensive. So all right, so we're coming up to our full hour, and somehow we answered all the questions, which is quite a rare occurrence.
Those were
Um,
great.
Thank you all so much for joining in. If there's any like last remaining burning questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. We'll also send out a replay of this session in our newsletter tomorrow, so that will hit your inbox probably first thing in the morning. We're really easy to reach if you have other questions or anything else that comes up. So you can hit reply on any of our newsletters, and that will come directly to our executive assistant, Joyce, who it will be able to answer questions and provide more context and insights. We do have our next cohort starting on March 9th, being led by Sarah with assistance and supervision from Michaela, who always oversees everything in each cohort. Our last few cohorts have sold out several weeks before the scheduled start date. So if you are looking to get your bone health journey started, then this is a really good time to secure your spot. We also do have an April 13 cohort that is open for registration as well if that fits your timeline better. So again, don't hesitate to get in touch, hit reply on any of the emails that you receive from us if you would like further information or have any other questions remaining. In the meantime, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today and taking some time out of your day to come and chat. We really, really love meeting everybody in our community. So it's always a joy to get to connect with all of you and hear what you're thinking about in terms of your bone health. Thank you, Karen, Michaela, Sarah, Kenny. So nice to have you all here to share your expertise and your insights. Appreciate all of you. Have a great rest of your evening, everybody. Really nice to see you all, and we hope to see you in one of our groups very soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, everyone.